Thank you, Pedro. I guess part of what we're trying to do is cover all of the moving pieces, and there are quite a few moving pieces in this scenario. Dr. Suchlicki presented some of the possible outcomes. Dr. Latell talked about what Cuba has learned and how they may act, and Pedro sort of discussed a little bit of the Cuban presence in Venezuela. My role is going to be to try to talk very briefly about what this means for Cuba. What will the impact on Cuba of changes in Venezuela? And for my purposes, I'm going to take Dr. Suchlicki's 9 scenarios and convert them into 2 scenarios. Great. I want to simplify this. And simply for my purposes is, will a regime emerge in Venezuela that is friendly to Cuba, or will a regime emerge that is not friendly to Cuba? So for my purposes, those will be really what I will look at. The economic impact will be enormous. I think it's been mentioned before, Carmelo Mesalagos, a Cuban economist that is normally very careful with his numbers, puts the figure at in excess of $13 billion a year in help, about 100,000 barrels of oil per day. Cuba sells some of that and keeps some of that. In terms of the Cuban doctors and health specialists, Maria Huerlao, another specialist, puts that figure about $7.5 billion per year of remittances that Venezuela sends to Cuba for those medical services. So we're in addition. It's not clear to me that it's in addition, but I think it could be. So we're talking about a huge amount of money. Be that what it may, it's hard to estimate. However, what I think I'm going to differ is what is the impact on Cuba? Clearly, if there is a change in Venezuela that is not friendly to Cuba, and those subsidies are diminished or stopped completely, the economic situation in Cuba would be horrendous. I mean, the economic impact will be tremendous. However, there seems to be this generalized belief that such a change in Venezuela will result in a political change in Cuba. I'm not so sure that that's going to happen at all. So from my point of view, if there is a change in Venezuela, which is the worst possible case scenario for Cuba, where the assistance ends, yes, Cubans will suffer tremendously. Cubans will go hungry. It will be an absolute disaster. But I do not from that draw the conclusion that that means that the Castro government will fall. And the reason that I draw that conclusion, and I don't want to sort of get academic here, but we have to make a distinction between an authoritarian regime and a totalitarian regime. And Julio Schilling has written a marvelous book on this topic. And the conclusion from that is, where you have an authoritarian regime with a well-developed civil society, yes, economic changes of that kind of a magnitude, or any kind of economic changes, may indeed result in a change of the polity in that. But where you have a totalitarian regime, as is the case in Cuba, I don't think it follows that those economic changes will change a totalitarian regime. If we look at places like North Korea, people die. They starve. That does not mean that the regime changes. So I would caution all of us to automatically draw the conclusion that a further economic disaster in Cuba will necessarily lead to a change in the regime in Cuba. And the reason for that would be precisely because I do make that distinction between an authoritarian regime and a totalitarian regime. Cuba will, in any case, do everything they can, obviously, not to lose this help. And yes, I would agree that they will stand with Maduro for a while, but if they have to throw him under the bus, they will in a second. They will throw Maduro under the bus, and they will put another puppet head. They will do what they need to do. But so I will not necessarily conclude that a change that we may see in the near future, where Maduro is being replaced by somebody else, necessarily means a victory for the Venezuelan opposition. There are many cases in which a change may be just a change in the leadership without necessarily that being a change in the polity per se. When you have, as we have in the case of Cuba, a dictatorship of total domination, it's a dictatorship that involves the political, the economic, and the social environments. That kind of economic determinism that we always make the mistake of saying, you know, economic changes will bring about, I don't think that we can really make that conclusion. So I would really caution you on that respect. The second aspect is the psychological impact. And one of the things that has been frustrating to me in these events in Venezuela is the lack of coverage, attention by the international press. No one seems to really be paying much attention. At least I have not seen significant coverage in the mainstream media at all. We've seen the Ukraine, yes, but Venezuela, not so much. That is concerning, because I think should this opposition not succeed, and they may not succeed, the opposition in Cuba will get the message that nobody really cares. And I think it would be demoralizing for whatever opposition Cuba may have, because simply there doesn't seem to be that much attention being paid. Not to mention that the Organization of American States has been missing in action. The United Nations has been missing in action. All of the Latin American presidents, with the exception of Chile, have been missing in action. So no one seems to be supporting the Venezuelan people. And psychologically, it concerns me greatly in terms of how the Cuban opposition will interpret that the youth of Venezuela came out in the streets en masse, and the world didn't come to their help. So that is concerning. I think I'll leave it at that, and we'll take some of the questions from you. Susan?
Dr. Purcell, welcome.